Hello and welcome. I'm Tom Burges Watson. You are watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. Breaking news. The Israeli military has just confirmed that the Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar has been killed in a military operation in the southern Gaza Strip. Sinwar, who was 61 years old, became the Hamas leader in August following the killing of the group's former leader, Ismail Haniyeh. Sinwar's death spells a massive blow to Hamas. Israel says he was the mastermind of the 7th of October attacks. Welcome. We begin with that breaking news just into us. It's been announced by the Israeli military that the Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar has indeed been killed in an Israeli operation in southern Gaza. Israel says that Sinwar was the architect of the 7th of October attacks, the deadliest attacks in Israeli history, in which 1,206 people lost their lives. All those attacks triggered Israel's military campaign in Gaza, which has resulted in the deaths of 42,438 people. Well, Sinwar's death represents a major blow to Hamas. Well, this is how the Israeli army announced the outcome of their military operation earlier on today. In a tweet, they said, during IDF operations in Gaza, 3 terrorists were eliminated. The IDF and the ISA are checking the possibility that one of the terrorists was Yahya Sinwar. Well, they have now confirmed that. At this stage, the identity of the terrorists couldn't be confirmed. In any case, that news has now been confirmed. The Israeli military saying that Yahya Sinwar was killed in the south of the Gaza Strip. Well, following that news, the Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant took to Twitter, declaring that Israel will pursue and eliminate each and every terrorist. That's the tweet that appeared there. Well, in his tweet, Gallant also posted some images of the former Hamas military chief Mohammed Deif, the Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, marking both of them with an X, as you can see there on your screens. The third image, that one in the middle, which is blacked out, was thought to represent Sinwar. That news has now been confirmed. Well, unsurprisingly, the news of Sinwar's death has been welcomed by many in Israel. We're going to show you the moment this was announced by a lifeguard at the beach that Yahya Sinwar had indeed been killed. And there were cheers there at the beach as the lifeguard made that announcement that Yahya Sinwar had been killed. For more reaction to this, we can cross the Jerusalem and speak to journalist Noga Tanopolsky. Thank you very much indeed for being with us once again here on Al Arabiya. Noga, great to have you with us. Just tell us what we know at this stage. I know the information's still coming in, and the Israeli military has only just confirmed that Yahya Sinwar is indeed dead. But just tell us what we know about the circumstances of his killing.
Well, we know 2 new things. One is that he was found by chance. The Israeli army did not have any special intelligence about his whereabouts. They were concerned about terrorist activity in a specific building. The building was shot at. Soldiers subsequently went to see what was in the rubble, and they found the body of Yahya Sinwar and 2 others. One thought to be basically his aide de camp, his closest aide, and no one else, as far as we have been told thus far. The other detail, which is, has had quite a bit of effect here in Israel, is that in fact he was about at the exit of the tunnel in which the 6 Israeli hostages were murdered last month or in late August. And the assumption right now is that when the Israeli army received information several months ago that he had surrounded himself with hostages, that it was those same 6 hostages who survived 11 months in captivity before being executed.
Okay, so as you're saying, a significant element of luck for those Israeli soldiers who weren't specifically targeting Sinwar, we gather. Fair to say he was public enemy #1 in Israel, wasn't he?
Yes, I mean, I think he's one of the most wanted men in the world. He was the military chief of Hamas for, I think, the last 15 years. So since he was released in the Gilad Shalit deal, a deal engineered by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to release a single Israeli hostage who Hamas had taken captive. He became Hamas's military leader. He was known for his viciousness, and he was known in particular for his viciousness against Palestinians. He was the chief architect of Hamas's activities against those Palestinians they accused of collaborating with Israel.
Okay, and there was a lot of hesitation between the first reports and the confirmation of Sinwar's death. That was presumably because forensics were trying to establish that they had indeed got the right person, and certainly the early photographs we saw, it did look an awful lot like the person in question. Have the tests now been carried out? Have the forensics now been concluded?
To the best of my knowledge, the DNA test has not yet come back, but his body is being operated on in a forensic institute outside of Tel Aviv. The first kind of official person to confirm that it was Yahya Sinwar, interestingly, is the man who was his former dentist. So an Israel prison service dentist who took care of Sinwar during the many years that he was in Israeli jail. He was the first person who, observing those pictures you just mentioned, said that for sure it was him. But even though we haven't yet received formal notification of the DNA results, I think that the Israeli army's confirmation that it's him, and now we see that the Israeli president has posted congratulations to the army on this achievement, that I think we can be fairly certain that it is him indeed.
We're expecting to hear from the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Are you aware of that? And what do you think we're likely to hear from him?
I am aware of it. And it's a huge question because, of course, there are many in Israel, among them the families of the more than 100 hostages, dead and alive, still being held in Gaza, who say, this is it. You got your victory shot. This is the total victory you've been talking about. Declare victory and offer a deal. There are even, to my surprise, Israeli news figures, news readers who have said this is the moment to basically offer Hamas amnesty for anyone who's still alive and money for the hostages brought home alive. So there's a lot of kind of energy in the air. But I have to tell you, I would be very surprised if Netanyahu declared victory or anything like an end to the war. I heard one of his closest legislators, a man named Boaz Bismuth, who spoke on the radio just in the last few minutes, who basically said this is just another step in Israel's ongoing war.
Okay, so I was going to ask you, I mean, do people think we've got here a catalyst for bringing about a conclusion to what's been a more than 1 year long military operation in Gaza? It doesn't sound like, from what you're hearing, that is widely established as being a likely course of action.
Well, your question's complicated because you asked, do people think? The answer is yes. Almost every public figure I've heard until now has called on the Prime Minister to use the leverage that he has gotten by having eliminated this almost legendary and, legendarily cruel figure at the head of Hamas, to use this to end the war. Certainly the families of hostages who are now protesting outdoors in Tel Aviv are asking for this desperately, and many former military figures are asking for this. You're asking me my assessment. My assessment is that the Prime Minister is unlikely to go in that direction, but in Israel, there are a huge amount of people who are asking exactly for that.
Okay, Noga Tanoli, journalist in Jerusalem, thank you very much indeed for being with us here on Al Arabiya News.
Thank you.
For more analysis, we can speak now to the Palestinian academic and political analyst, Professor Kamel Hawwash. Thank you so much for being with us, Professor. Just put this into perspective for our international viewers. How much of a death blow is this to Hamas?
I mean, what we've seen in the case of Hezbollah, for example, is that it took them a few days to regroup, and then they did. So it is possible that Hamas can regroup. The extent of damage beyond the killing of Yahya Sinwar today isn't very clear to us outside. There have been no independent reporters who have been able to, because Israel won't let reporters in, who have been able to tell us what is going on the ground. And they can't even tell you, this is the Israelis, how many Palestinian militants they have killed. So and we hear there's still ongoing action in Rafah, not only in Rafah, in Jabalia. So it's difficult to assess, but there's no doubt that any group that loses its leader, particularly someone that that group looked up to very strongly, it will have an impact. And they will also, and this is an important point, I think, that they will take some, if you like, a boost despite the bad news, that the guy was killed while he was fighting. He wasn't scuppering in a tunnel and was assassinated. He was actually, according to the pictures that we've seen, he was involved in fighting back, if you like, and that even the Israelis hadn't conducted an operation to actually kill him.
Yeah, it's interesting you draw the parallel with Hezbollah and Hassan Nasrallah, and as we've seen, as you've been saying, Hezbollah has managed to continue functioning without Hassan Nasrallah. There have been successes. They too have been killed. That's what we understand. In terms of succession planning for Hamas, who comes after him?
Well, it's difficult for me to say, to be honest, in terms of the names. We don't know who is on the ground in Gaza. We know some of the people who are abroad. They will continue in terms of the political wing. There will be someone found who will be the political leader, if you like, of Hamas. That's for sure. In terms of the military side, Israel says they killed Mohammed al-Daif, who was if you like, the chief military person, but Hamas has always denied that. So it's difficult to know again whether he is around and still conducting the responses to Israel. But what I suspect is that there will continue to be fighting between Israel and Hamas people. Netanyahu can declare a total victory if he wishes, but he can't be sure, as evidence has shown, both in Lebanon and in Gaza. What everybody wants now is for him to actually realize that it is time to stop the killing, the massacres. This was a defining moment today, I think, but so was were the images of people burning in tents while still connected to medical equipment that should have resulted in the world saying to Netanyahu, enough is enough. That hasn't happened. Maybe this is the opportunity to end the war for the sake of the civilians who are being targeted on a daily basis in Gaza and Lebanon, but also since one of the objectives now for Israel is the return of their people to the north, then this could be the moment, because all the various groupings outside Hezbollah and in Yemen, the Houthis and so on, have said they're engaged in what they are doing to support Gaza. If there is no fighting anymore, that will bring quiet to the north and also to other parts of the Middle East, and that can only be in the interest of people who can at least begin to recover themselves and their families and begin to look forward, hopefully, to someone saying, we've got to have a political solution now. And whatever Netanyahu says about a Palestinian state or his opposition to it, that is the way forward, and that everybody gets around the table and makes sure it happens so there is no repeat. Because what Israel must realize is the extent of hatred towards it has quadrupled, if not even higher, over the last year. And surely it must engage in something that reduces that hatred if it truly wants to live side by side with the Palestinian people.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't sound like you're particularly optimistic that this event is going to be a catalyst for an immediate end to the fighting in Gaza, but perhaps we'll have to wait and see what Prime Minister Netanyahu says when we listen to him in about a quarter of an hour from now. But let's just talk about the Hamas attacks and the situation in Gaza for ordinary Palestinian people. I think 100% of the population of Gaza now living below the poverty line. And I'm just wondering, given the suffering, the tremendous suffering of the Palestinians in Gaza, just how much popular support you think still remains for Hamas and remain for figures like Sinwar?
Well, I think what I've been hearing from talking to people is, of course, people are worried themselves, those in Gaza, about being particularly moved from the north to the south and so on, from Jabalia. The messages that come out say, please pray for us. The Israelis are going to kill us. That's how they... So the blame is with Israel in terms of the operations it carries out. And I gave you the incident about the tents, but there are daily incidents where Israel continues to oppress and kill. In terms of their view of what they see as the resistance, the Palestinians will tell you they've been trying to negotiate with Israel for decades, and that has brought them nothing. And so, since they're entitled under international law to resist the occupation, then they look to people who will help them end it. The reality is, had Israel ended the occupation of Palestine before the 7th of October, the 7th of October would not have happened. And now is the time for them to say, okay, we have achieved our objectives. Let's get the hostages released. Let's end the killing. Let's not make any plans to continue the occupation of Gaza and to settle Israelis there, because we want peace. If that doesn't happen, then Israel doesn't want peace. Its status in the whole world, it's being delegitimized because people cannot believe what it's been doing over the past year, and therefore the best way for Israel to progress is to sit down and genuinely look at a way of leaving the West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem and making peace with the Palestinians. Otherwise, this will continue.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there. I'm told we're out of time. Really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us at very short notice. Professor Kamel Hawwash, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
For more analysis, we can cross to Washington, D.C. and... Okay, we're not going to go to Washington. Let's speak to our next guest, who is, in fact, Daniel Levy, president of the U.S. Middle East Project and a former peace negotiator for several Israeli prime minister. Thank you for joining us as well at short notice, hence my script not being exactly finalized. I just want to start by asking you a question I put to some other people we've been speaking to this evening and ask you what the death of Yahya Sinwar represents to Hamas.
I think it represents the death of an important leader, but perhaps more significantly in the mythology. Going into the future, Tom, it represents the martyrdom, apparently in battle, of this leader. And I think it would not surprise if it strengthens the resistance in the popular public imagination, because we have this mistaken assumption sometimes, we, I think, in the West, Israelis, that it's the leader. You get the leader and you've dealt this death blow, that you chop off the head of the snake. And it's a failure to understand that a resistance movement rooted in popular struggle of a people who are colonized and denied their rights and freedoms does not die with the death of a leader. If anything, as I say, it's a new lease of life in that popular imagination, because the conditions of the Palestinians are what gives rise to the resistance, not the charisma of Mr. Sinwar or Salah Haruri or previous leaders of Hamas, all of whom have been assassinated by Israel in the past.
So you're basically saying he's eminently replaceable. This could galvanize support around Hamas. But that does depend, doesn't it, on what's left of Hamas? Because from what we can understand, the group has been severely degraded. And if that's the case, I mean, it's not going to be business as usual, is it?
Well, I think what we have seen for some time is that Hamas that launched the October 7th attack is not the Hamas of now, but it is a Hamas that has cell structures that are more than capable of maintaining a guerrilla resistance. All this would be done with. Hamas has a collective leadership structure. It's true that many of the known figures in the military leadership inside Gaza are no longer around. But the idea that this is it, and it's, we see this, we see it in Lebanon. We see this so often, the idea that you remove the leader, it's done. That, I think, is a very mistaken way of looking at things. So I think we will know soon enough, because I imagine that the Israeli prime minister is going to turn around and say, okay, now you have the opportunity, give up, hand in your weapons, hold up your hands, give back the hostages. Maybe he'll say in a very sleight of hand way, people of Gaza, we've freed you from these horrific rulers when we bombed and killed you for the last year. And we will see. And will Hamas give up? Will the white flag be raised? I very much doubt it.
Yeah, it's interesting. And as you say, Benjamin Netanyahu is going to speak very shortly, we gather. A lot of the new reaction we're getting here at Al Arabiya is focused on the hostages, actually. Germany calling on Hamas to release the hostages. The Israeli president saying, bring back the Gaza hostages, based on the news of the death of Yahya Sinwar. Do you think those calls to focus efforts on the well-being of the hostages are likely to be heeded at all?
No, because Prime Minister Netanyahu does not prioritize the hostages. Of course, he will say, my priority now is return the hostages. I've now created the pressure. But he will also set conditions which will guarantee that won't happen. He will say, I need to finish the job. I mean, I'm speaking just before he does, so let's see whether I get any of this right. I think he will talk about those who said, don't go into Rafah, those who said, don't take the Philadelphia corridor. Had we not have done those things, then Mr. Sinwar would still be among the living. So I think he will see this as vindication, and he will set his own course forward, which I think, to those paying attention, will prove that the inability to achieve a ceasefire is not a function of the living or dead status of Mr. Sinwar. It's a function of Prime Minister Netanyahu not wanting a ceasefire. He intends to stay in Gaza. He intends to continue being a wartime leader, and the US is not going to use the leverage and the pressure to change that calculation. So I don't want to dash the hopes, because it's desperate in northern Gaza, the starvation, the forced displacement. It is desperate to bring an end to this. But I think unless other things change, not only, but very high up on that list, American policy and refusal to use leverage, there will be pressure inside Israel. Don't get me wrong. There will be pressure. I don't think that's where Netanyahu is looking to move next.
In terms of popular support for Hamas inside Gaza, has that changed at all, would you say, in the last couple of months? And I put this question to a guest earlier, and making the point that 100% of the population of Gaza lives below the poverty line. I mean, the suffering, and you've mentioned it as well, of the Gazan people is something that I don't think we've seen in living memory. It's horrific. Have the people of Gaza made any connection in their minds or vocalized that at all, that their hardship and their misery is directly linked to Hamas's actions?
I would ask the following question to you. Would you consider that it's directly linked to Hamas's actions more than it's directly linked to the actions of those bombing Gaza, the actions of those who placed a siege on Gaza for the last 18 years, the actions of those who drove out the families of Gazans in the Nakba of 1947 to 49, which is why when we see and hear refugee camps, what refugee camps? The Gazan Palestinian population are refugees because of the initial displacement. So I'm not suggesting that there is not a level of anger. That would be expected. But the real anger, I think the greater anger, will be at those who are dropping 2,000-pound bombs on schools, on hospitals, on residential buildings. And that's the Israeli military and the state of Israel.
All right, well, we're going to have to leave it there. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us, Daniel Levy. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, we can speak now to the Palestinian politician Khalid Fendi, who joins us now. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Just first of all, where do we head to from here?
Well, I mean, this is frankly, a huge achievement to the Israelis right at the moment, and Yahya Sinwar is a significant blow and likely throwing Hamas into disarray right at the moment and disrupting its leadership and its structure. So this could weaken its operational capabilities in Gaza right at the moment, and that will be affecting positively on a ceasefires plan, and that's what the people are looking forward right at the moment. People of Gaza are not really much concerned about the death of any leaders of Hamas, but what they are really concerned about the most is a humanitarian a ceasefire or just to get the aid in. So for the Israelis there is a huge achievement, but for the Palestinians there is another topic that they are focusing on right at the moment, and they've been trying to push forward since we've been through this catastrophe, this humanitarian catastrophe. So I reckon the death of Sinwar right at the moment would be a bit of an opportunity for the people to breathe actually, and for the international community to look onto Gaza from a different scope and from a humanitarian scope, and in order to do a bit of a ceasefire, a bit of considering what's going on as a bit of misery.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to ask you, we've been talking about this this evening with a lot of people we're talking to, you know, succession planning in the ranks of Hamas. I mean, clearly they'd be prepared for an event like this. One would assume there's a chain of successors that's been put in place. They've thought about succession planning. But was there anything about the personality of Yahya Sinwar that made him perhaps difficult to replace? Was that anything strike you?
Well, from my perspective, I don't think there is any difficulties in replacing Yahya Sinwar. I mean, I completely understand when Haniya got dead in Iran. It was a bit easy for Hamas leaders to choose Sinwar as a successor, because the decision was made completely in Gaza, because we at a point we've seen there is a bit of detached in terms of policy making between Hamas in Gaza and Hamas in Qatar. So the one who has been always taking decisions for Hamas is completely Yahya Sinwar. So for the moment, I think there is a couple of successors that we can look at right at the moment, and one of them could be Khalid Mishal. To be honest, he would be more in the middle, and that's what the Palestinian people in Gaza are looking forward. They don't want really to be run by people who are very far radicals or far right, and that's which really can make the situation more worse. So it's going to be an easy process to get a successor, and I'm sure there is a couple of candidates for Hamas to choose from, and obviously the leaders are not going to be from Gaza. They are going to be in Iran, and the only reason behind this is trying to be more approachable to the international community, and in order for the international community and leaders to speak to them way more easier than being in Gaza under this siege since 7th of October. So I reckon there are a lot of work needs to be done right at the moment, and one of them is trying to choose the right person to be replacing Yahya Sinwar. We can't have radicals anymore in Gaza.
Okay, well, I appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. We're going to move on now, but thank you very much indeed, Khaled Fendi, a Palestinian politician. Thank you for speaking to us. Well, for more, let's cross to DC, and we can speak to our correspondent there, Simon Marks. Simon, I don't know if there's been any reaction out of the United States at this stage, given that the news is so new, but we understand that President Biden was informed because I believe he's still mid-flight heading to Germany on Air Force One. But nevertheless, this is likely to be a welcome development as far as Washington's concerned, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Tommy was informed of this breaking news while he was in flight, although the Americans had already said earlier here today, before President Biden left the White House, that they had been contacted by the Israelis and had been told that the Israelis had recovered a body that they believed was that of Mr. Sinwar. So confirmation coming after President Biden was already en route to Germany. We're moments away from a briefing here at the State Department, also the Pentagon has announced that it is going to be providing a news briefing in a short while as well. That will be the first opportunity for official reaction. Unofficial reaction, though, has been pouring in. Americans for Peace Now put out a statement saying the Israeli government, Hamas, the United States, and all interested parties should seize this moment to declare an immediate ceasefire. This must, of course, include the return of all hostages and the admission of a massive influx of aid to the people of Gaza. It is worth remembering that this unexpected news of the killing of Mr. Sinwar comes just a matter of 4 days after Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin sent that letter to the Israeli government, giving them 30 days to improve humanitarian access and take a whole variety of other steps to improve humanitarian conditions in Gaza, or else face the possibility of at least the partial suspension of US military supplies. We've also had some comment within the last hour from Mark Kansian, a senior advisor in the International Security Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and he's very much picking up on what you were just discussing, Tom. He says killing leaders of a large insurgent terrorist group does not make the group disappear. There is always a subordinate willing to step up. However, there are damaging near and mid-term effects for the group. In the near term, there is a stutter step, he describes it, in operations as the new leader establishes control over the organization. And I think when we do hear from the Biden administration, they will certainly argue that this provides an opening to advance those conversations about a ceasefire, the return of detainees, that the US administration absolutely believes Mr. Sinwar had blocked. And by removing him from the field of battle, they may think here, and we'll find out more when we hear from those US officials, they may think here that there is now more of an opening for those ceasefire negotiations to advance than there was just 24 hours ago.
Yeah, as you've been speaking, we've been getting alerts and all the latest on what Prime Minister Netanyahu's been saying. He has indeed confirmed the death of Yahya Sinwar. We'd already had it confirmed from various sources, but coming from the Prime Minister of Israel, that's obviously important. He also says evil has been delivered a blow, but our task is not complete. So again, that sounds like, as people have been saying to us on this program this evening, this isn't exactly being seized upon as a moment to perhaps draw a line under 1 year and a week of fighting in Gaza. And I'm just wondering whether you think this news of Yahya Sinwar's death and the fact that there's only a couple of months left in the Biden administration gives Benjamin Netanyahu a little bit more leeway in the face of that criticism you just mentioned. Patience was running out with Benjamin Netanyahu, and the humanitarian situation in Gaza has shocked a lot of people. But do you think Netanyahu will now feel he's got a bit more leeway with Washington, given that he's clearly able to say our campaign is working?
Yeah, well, I think it certainly helps Netanyahu in the sense that one of the criticisms from Washington, not so much from the White House, but from other figures, has been that the strategy isn't working, that you had not succeeded, as Israel had set out to do, in literally creating a situation where Hamas was not going to be able to continue operating and being the dominant force in Gaza. So there is that opportunity for Netanyahu now to turn around and say to the Americans and to his critics here in the United States, you see, we were determined to keep going, and this is one example of why we needed to do that. But look, all of this is going to be another test of whether Joe Biden, in his remaining months in office, has any leverage over the Israeli Prime Minister. I mean, we have seen time and again Joe Biden privately and occasionally publicly expressing concern about the nature nature of the relationship that he has with Prime Minister Netanyahu, saying just a few days ago that no American president had provided a greater degree of support to Israel than he had. Nobody, he insisted, had been more ironclad in their backing of an Israeli leader than he had been. And he said Bibi should remember that. Well, the problem, of course, is that many inside the White House do not see an Israeli leader who does remember that. And that's why this 30-day window for a change in Israeli behavior is another fresh test of Joe Biden's capacity to influence the Israeli leader's behavior. And the disappearance for Mr. Sinwar on the scene, the Americans will see as an opportunity to try and advance those ceasefire talks and try and make progress in securing the release of those hostages that Hamas still holds in Gaza. But whether Benjamin Netanyahu will see it through that particular prism, I think is going to be a huge question that is consuming policymakers here in Washington.
OK, thank you very much indeed for that. Our chief correspondent, Simon Marks, in Washington. Thank you very much indeed. Just for the benefit of our viewers, we have had it confirmed from the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that Yahya Sinwar is dead, and he's also been saying the war is not over. Well, let's get more reaction, and we can cross to London and speak to the former British Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, sir. Your successor, John Healey, has said, I, for one, will not be mourning him. Would you concur?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, this is a man who is, officially classified as a terrorist by the British government, who was responsible for organising and perpetrating a massacre of over 1,200 people, still have hostages held, and has caused turmoil in the Middle East, just at a moment when there was, I think, quite a bit of hope. We had potential normalization with Saudi Arabia having already occurred elsewhere. And there's no doubt at all that his objective was to put a spanner in the works, send the Middle East into reverse. And he has, in many ways, was successful in achieving that this last year. So, no, I certainly won't be mourning his passing. And I do hope it's an opportunity for a new phase, because clearly everybody wants to see peace. I mean, everyone should want to see peace, but he was a big barrier to it, I think.
Yeah, we're listening to Benjamin Netanyahu speaking as we're talking to you as well, and we'll be able to have a look at the press conference that Netanyahu is giving. There is the Israeli Prime Minister live briefing the public about what has happened with regards to the killing of Yahya Sinwar earlier on today in southern Gaza. So that news obviously confirmed. He's also been saying the war is not over. Just listening to what the Prime Minister of Israel has been saying, Mr. Shapps, it doesn't sound like he sees this as an opportunity for a change of tack. He doesn't seem to be talking about diplomacy or negotiations at this particular stage. You wouldn't expect him to, though, would you?
Possibly not tonight, but I think it does change things. In the end, I think it would have been difficult for Israel to ever leave Gaza without having dealt with Sinwar. Now that he's gone, and indeed a number of his deputies over a period of time, you get to a point where Israel can say, well, look, we said we were going to go and make a real change. They can claim to have done that. And so, yes, you'd kind of expect him to say that. But I do think it actually does change. It clearly changes the picture on the ground. And I think it is important to grasp the opportunity to make this conflict move in a different direction, and one which ought to be towards trying to get a peaceful resolution to this now.
Sure, and I just wanted to ask you, because of course you were the Defence Secretary at the time of the 7th of October attacks last year, and did you feel that it was a matter of time before the Israelis caught up with Yahya Sinwar?
Yes, I think that's right, and we've seen elsewhere. The same things happened in Lebanon, that they've got the head of Hezbollah as well. And I think, although I hear people say, security experts say quite a lot, well, it's a matter, you can cut off the head, a new leader will come about. Remember, Osama bin Laden, who organized 9/11, was eventually taken out by the Americans, and it did hugely damage Al-Qaeda. And so, they're not the organization that they were. So I don't think you should underestimate how, particularly a charismatic leader like Sinwar, can end up being quite a big part of the story. And I do think I think the danger is underestimating how important this is rather than overestimating it tonight.
Sure, and as you've been speaking again, we've been looking at the Israeli Prime Minister on the other side of the screen talking, and one of the things he said is, evil has suffered a severe blow, as I said earlier, confirming the death of Yahya Sinwar and saying the war is not over. And just going back to what we were saying about, putting the clock back a year and to your time as a Defense Secretary, and when the 7th of October happened, did you imagine that here would be a year and a week later that fighting in Gaza would still be going on?
Well, I really hoped it wouldn't be, and I'll be completely upfront. I always said to my Israeli counterpart, Gallant, when you go in, you have to understand that it'd be very difficult to leave, and that could be almost your problem. You could be permanently there. So I think the useful thing here is, with the person, Sinwar, who orchestrated the 7th of October, now having been removed from the sea, it does provide at least the starting point to talk about how to bring the Gaza stage of this to a conclusion. And I think that is relevant. You ask how I felt about it a year ago, and I have to tell you, of course, it's been horrendous this past year. A lot of people have lost their lives. My fears were that it could have been even worse, and it could still be even worse. We've seen Iran, no one's friends in the region, try to stir things up, not just by its own proxies of Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, the Iranian linked militias in Syria and Iraq, but also Iran firing on Israel as well. So we've seen, an instability created by this man Sinwar, acting as he did. And I don't think anyone should be in any doubt that his removal from the scene is good news this evening.
Sure, and I just want to ask you, you mentioned, and we've been talking about this incredible succession of events the last few months. As a new news channel, we've had no shortage of things to talk about, and there's been, very fast-moving developments in the region. Does it look to you like there is a strategy here, that all of this is somehow planned, or are you of the school of thought, as a lot of our guests have been here on Al Arabiya News, that Prime Minister Netanyahu is really shooting from the hip?
Yeah, no, I don't think there's a great deep strategy to it. Netanyahu has plenty of his own domestic problems. I think that there have been points at which it's become very stark, and then, look for other alternative routes through. I think the one thing which, from his perspective, he will say has kept this going is the lack of the return of the hostages. We did see that limited hostage exchange early on, but unfortunately since then, the hostages coming out have mostly been dead rather than alive, 1-2 exceptions. So no, I don't think there's been a grand strategy, to answer your question, but nor actually, just to complete that picture, do I think there was a grand strategy on the other side of this. My understanding as Defense Secretary at the time, and from the intelligence that I've read over the period, is that Sinwar was acting and behaving, although trained and funded, equipped by Iran, he was nonetheless, to some degree, just acting this out himself. And so I don't think it was actually a very broadly coordinated approach from Hamas either. And that's why these things are so dangerous, because when you have the lack of coordination in any which direction, the risk of miscalculation becomes enormous. And that's why we've seen, unfortunately, just some terrible outcomes from this conflict in this last year on both sides.
Yeah, indeed. And I've just got one last question for you before I let you go. I just wanted to ask you whether you think in a situation like this with Yahya Sinwar's killing, whether it would have been better for him to have been brought into custody and to have faced justice. Would that have been more helpful? Would that have been a better outcome, do you think, not least from the point of view of bringing about a conclusion to the war in Gaza?
You know, it's very hard to say what the counterfactual could or might have been. You know, here is a man who spent, I think, 22 years in captivity in prison in Israel, and in fact, he learned to speak Israeli and it didn't do any good when it came to making peace. I think he came out in a prisoner exchange back in 2011, if I remember rightly, and it didn't do any good to Middle East peace. This man was not a friend of Israel, obviously sworn to destroy it, but he also wasn't a friend of other moderate Middle Eastern countries or Gulf countries, and was, you know, very much part of the problem rather than the solution. So I would hesitate to say. I usually would say, you know, don't bring someone in and have them answer for their crimes. But I have to say, in this case, as with Osama bin Laden all those years ago, there is a point at which simply removing them from the theatre, removing them from the picture, is actually better than what might have flowed otherwise.
All right. Well, we really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us, former UK Defence Secretary Grant Shapps. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, we've been following the press conference given by the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who says the war is not over. He's confirmed the death of Yahya Sinwar. He says there's an opportunity here for the region to stop what he called the axis of evil and bring peace and prosperity to the Middle East. A lot of focus as well on the hostages who remain in custody in Gaza. Let's speak now to Daniel Lifshitz, who is the grandson of one of the hostages, Oded Lifshitz. And we've spoken before, Daniel. It's really kind of you to talk to us once again here on Al Arabiya News. Before we talk about hostages, because I know there's a lot of focus now on hostages in light of this news, but could I just ask firstly for your reaction when you heard the news that Yahya Sinwar had been killed?
You know, Yahya Sinwar is the archi-terrorist who brought this region to an awful situation. And I think really that now when he is killed, we really have the chance and the opportunity to a better future. We have a chance to end the war, release the hostages, and really bring some fresh air to Gaza and for all the families of the hostages and in Israel. I really feel that is something that can happen from today, and it's a new day from what I feel for this region.
Yeah, indeed. And the Prime Minister, who's speaking while you're speaking as well, has described Sinwar's death as, quote, an important landmark in the decline of Hamas. Tell me a bit about the latest with regards to your grandfather. I know he's in his 80s. I know you've said he's worked very tirelessly his whole life. He was a journalist, if I'm not mistaken, who worked tirelessly on the cause of the Palestinians, the two-state solution. Have you got any news on him? Have we heard anything since the last time we spoke, Daniel?
So no, we have no news in the last few weeks, but he's an 84-year-old man and with a lot of medical issues. I do believe, you know, that now maybe we get closer to a chance to get him back as the man who's responsible for kidnapping such an old man, women, children, is not with us anymore. And I really look forward to the massive pressure from everyone around the table. I mean, we got into a chance that it was really, we were helpless the last time we spoke, and since then nothing moved, and all the attention went to Lebanon and Iran, and now we really suddenly have this attention go back to Gaza and go back to the hostages and the war in Gaza. And I feel like now, before the elections in the US, it's a great chance for Biden, it's a chance for the Emir and President Assisi to find the person who will be now in charge of these negotiations and really bring those people back home. I mean, you see all those behind me here are 29 hostages still coming from the kibbutz of peace, kibbutz Niroz, who did everything for the coexistence and for peace, and since 2007 is suffering from rockets all the time from Gaza, but still with that believed all the time that a better future can come. And I hope today it's a day that we are closer to the release of the hostages, closer to end the suffering in Gaza. And I'm calling, everyone now have a chance. Saudi Arabia, Emirates, I really feel that we do have now this chance.
Okay, I'm sorry, Daniel, to cut you short. We're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time. Daniel Lifshitz, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us.
Thank you.
Yahya Sinwar, the slain Hamas leader, was born in Khan Yunis in the Gaza Strip. He spent 24 years in Israeli prisons, where he underwent brain surgery to remove a cancerous tumor. After his release, he rose to prominent leadership positions within Hamas and was soon referred to as the walking dead man by Israel. He spent years operating in the shadows before he would be named the architect of the October 7th attack. Sinwar was one of the founding members of Hamas and established its security apparatus known as Majd, which was responsible for pursuing and punishing those accused of spying for Israel. A graduate of the Islamic University in Gaza, he spoke Hebrew fluently and was known for his deep understanding of the Israeli culture and society. He later became a key leader in the Izz ad-Din al-Qassam Brigades, Hamas's military wing, before taking on leadership of the movement in Gaza. In September 2015, the US State Department designated him as an international terrorist. Following the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran 2 months ago, Sinwar became the new leader of Hamas.
Look back there at the life of Yahya Sinwar, who's died at the age of 61. Let's get a reminder of our top stories. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has confirmed the news that the Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar has been killed in a military operation in the southern Gaza Strip. Sinwar, who was 61 years old, became the Hamas leader in August, following on from the killing of the group's former leader, Ismail Haniyeh. That brings you up to date with the world news, that breaking news of the death of Yahya Sinwar. Coming up next, Hadley Gamble will be here, then at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Do join Rosanna Lockwood for Global News Today. That's a roundup of top stories, international news, and exclusive insights. That's it from me. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned.